So we first go to Exodus, and Exodus 3:11 says, "And but Moses said to God, 'Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?' And God said, 'I will be with you, and there will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you'll worship on this mountain.' God tells Moses, 'I am with you. Go forth, and I will provide a sign that I have sent you.' He provided Moses with undeniable evidence. Another one, Jeremiah 29:11 through 14. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. When you will call upon me, then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, and will bring you back to the place for which I carried you into exile." God gives a promise here, and He just says that He has plans laid out for you. And if you walk in them, He will answer you when you pray. He will make Himself known when you seek Him. He will bring you out of captivity and will bring you out of exile. But it all begins with each of us, you and I, taking steps to act on what He's called us to. One more example, and probably my favorite. Numbers 13:30. God told Moses to send men to inspect the land He promised them. Every man had come back with a grisly report, saying things like, "The people are too large and too strong. It's a land that devours its inhabitants." Well, Caleb responds in 13:30. It says, "Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, 'Let's go at once and occupy the land, for we are well able to overcome it.'" I just love that. I love that spirit, that ferocity, just the plain, straightforward, black and white. Let's go now. We're going to win. Just knew that God was with him. He realized he was sent by God. He embraced it and was ready to make it happen. I love that kind of person. I know a few of those guys, and they are just, you just always want to be around them because they just know the victory and the authority that they walk in. And Caleb was said to have a different spirit. Numbers 14:24, it says, "But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land which he went, and his descendants shall possess it." So, because of his faith, Caleb was given fulfillment of God's promise, and even his descendants were blessed. Not just Caleb, but his descendants, his kids, his grandkids. What kind of inheritance do you want to leave for your children, your grandchildren? It starts with action. It starts with active faith. It takes walking in what God has called us to. Have you prayed and asked God what his plan, his path is for your life? Be like Caleb. If you read more of his story, it says that he wanted the biggest hill that had the biggest giants. It was also the greatest hill with the best view where he could overlook the whole land. He wanted to fight to have the very best that God promised him. It wasn't He could have went and settled at the bottom of the hill or over on the piece of land by the river, which a piece of land by the river is great. But no. He wanted the very best, and he wouldn't settle for it. He knew what God promised him. He knew that in faith, God walked with him. He had already given him great victory. So, what's another battle? What's another mountain to climb? If you want to reside on the top of the hill, sometimes you have to fight to get to the top. But once you reach the pinnacle, the victory is that much greater. And so Caleb was the same way. He wouldn't settle for anything less than the best. The men I mentioned in these three stories, they acted in obedience and with God, and his word says that God was with them 100%. So let's get back to Gideon for a second here. Gideon was a man from an undistinguished family. He considered himself the very least of his household. He had no confidence in his abilities, his faith, or his strength. He was just a regular Joe who was threshing wheat when the Spirit of the Lord called upon him. What's the first thing Gideon did when he was called upon? Question God. He says, well, if the Lord's with us, why has all this happened to us? Isn't he the mighty God that delivered us from Egypt? The Lord has abandoned us. Why has he let all this happen? And how does God reply? He just basically ignores everything Gideon says and says, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel. Have I not sent you?" It's just in plain English. He says, "You don't like it? Well, go do something about it." He then goes on to tell God how weak his family is and how he's the weakest of all. And isn't this like something we all can relate to? Just feeling weak and helpless and being scared by what God is asking us to do. God called me to be a pastor, and there's times where I just don't feel adequate, where I feel like, who am I to pastor anyone? If you only knew my past, God. And then I'd remember, God knows my past. He doesn't care. He knows what he created me for. He brought me through many things as a lesson to grow me, to teach me, to make me into the person I am, to mold and shape like clay. You know, like Gideon, so many of us feel like victory can't be for us. So, to continue on, Gideon, he still didn't believe God. He tested him further and he said, "Well, if it's really you, the all sovereign Lord, wait here until I return with an offering." So, the next thing he does is he tells God to wait. What did I do? I got my calling and say, "Oh no, God, that's not for me. I'm too weak. I'm too inadequate. We're just gonna put that aside." And so, with putting it aside, then it's it's just the next logical step. You first deny your ability, you then put it aside and shelf it, just like Gideon did. So then, what does God say? He says, "I'll wait until you return." And if that right there isn't an entire message in one line, then I don't really know what is. It's God says, "I'll wait until you return." So not only does he accept you when you say you're not good enough, he ignores it and tells you that you are. Then when you tell him you need him to wait, he waits. Every time I read that, it just floors me. So then, as the story continues, Gideon goes inside his house, prepares an offering of a young goat and bread. He brings some broth for dipping. As he returns, the angel of God says, "Take the meat and unleavened bread, put it over there on the rock, pour out the broth," and then the angel consumes the offering in fire. So now, Gideon is ready to see that it's God calling him. "Oh, mighty God," he cries out. God replies, "Peace, do not be afraid, for you shall not die." So, again, the steps. Gideon denies his calling, tells God to wait, finally realizes that it's really God, makes his offering, and then God says, guarantees him victory. "Do not be afraid, you shall not die." Is Gideon convinced? Nope. Again, he asks God to prove that he is who he says he is. Again, the patience of God is shown when he does as Gideon asks. After this, he breaks down the altars to false gods, forms an army. God cuts down the army to 300 men and says to Gideon, "Go and listen to what your enemies are saying, so you will be encouraged to attack." After hearing the conversation of his enemies, his company of 300 blow their trumpets. The Midianites go crazy. They slay each other. They flee, and Gideon and his men follow until the word says every Midianite has been killed. So, in closing, God called Gideon, waited for him to believe that he was God, gave him clear signs that it was him who was calling. And isn't that just like God to hold Gideon's hand every step of the way, to call him, to wait on him, to show himself not once but twice, and then to promise victory and give it? Why did it all work this way? Because Gideon had active faith. He questioned some things and he took his time in some instances, but he consistently stepped forward, step by step by step. He listened to all that God had commanded of him. There's times when we're called and we just ignore it. If you don't stand up and take action, God cannot, no, will not unlock the blessings in your life. This story ends that Gideon lives to a ripe old age. He had peace for 40 years in the land. He had 70 sons and he lived in the fullness God had for him. God requires our action. He requires obedience. He requires love. Are you walking in what God has called you to? If not, I recommend you pray about that. Pray like it all depends on God and work like it all depends on you. If you don't get that clear answer, start moving in a direction. Trust that God is within you, will guide your feet, and will move you in the right direction. If you feel a passion, a deep, heartfelt passion about something, just start moving in that way. If it's if it's business, if God's called you to business, do business. If God has called you to pastor, then be a pastor. If God has called you to be a mother, then be a mother. Just do anything you do it for the glory of God. Walk in active faith. Don't just have this whole sit back, Jesus, take the wheel mentality. I would love to see each and every one of us walking out what God has called us to. So business, ministry, addictions, immorality, judgment, all these things that we have in our life, what is God calling you to leave behind? What is He calling you to take up? So this week, I just want you to pray on that. Really, really ask God what it is He has for you, where He wants you to be. So, anyways, that's what I have for you guys. Love you. Hope it blesses you. Leave me some feedback. Let me know what you thought. If I was right, if I was wrong. Just be gentle. It's my first sermon. Got many more to come, but just wanted to share this one with you guys. So, be blessed. Thanks.